The secret of the spiritually awake is to die before you die and find that there is no death. So no one survives a spiritual awakening. But in this video, now that we've got this reality playlist going, what I'd like to do is offer 5 analogies for the spiritual awakening, because it can be a very bizarre experience for anyone to have. And so the first analogy could be likened to the hand and the fist. And so if we consider ourselves to be this organism that we possess, when we open our hands, we don't really feel, or we're not really aware of our hands. We just go about our daily business. But if we scrunch our hands up into a fist, we can suddenly begin to feel almost eventually a sense of separation, that we can now become conscious of this fist as perhaps a separate entity altogether. And so if we consider this fist now to be the ego structure with which we are all endowed, as we look out the window and see these people walking around, and we think of our entire body as the galactic being, the universal consciousness. But because we're so contracted, because we're so condensed and focused with our thinking, excessively so, with Western education, which is constantly sharpening the intellect and focusing the mind on the minutiae of reality, trapped in these tiny little cells that we call rooms and classrooms, and ignoring the profound mystery that surrounds us all. This is symbolic of the fist. And are you still holding your fist nice and tightly? Because this is the state of consciousness that humanity is currently in. But if you begin to use your imagination, if you begin to meditate, if you begin to visualize and stimulate the innate feminine traits of our intelligence, you will soon experience the release. And now let's let go of our fist. And as we slowly release our fist, feel that release, feel that pressure being dissipated, and feel like the existence of our fist, which was once seemingly a separate entity, is slowly dissolved and released back into your body as the blood begins to flow. This idea of separation is slowly wearing thin, and before you know it, it's just like our other hand, which we became unaware of throughout this process. And so this is one way of looking at spiritual awakening, which is effectively the dissipation or the removal, the destruction of a contracted state of awareness, which is how we could define the ego. And so in the second example, we could take Bob the balloon and imagine ourselves to, similar to the hand, being a balloon, and that the material of this balloon, the envelope of the balloon, is our skin, and our consciousness we feel is contained solely within. And we draw a little face on this balloon, and we say that he's called Bob, and he's walking around, and you might ask him, who are you? What do you do? And that's how people will often answer that question. They will say, I'm Bob, I'm an electrician, or I'm Sandra, and I work in admin. Whatever it might be. This is an illusion based on the separation that we experience through this ego structure. And again, if we begin to exercise our divine feminine faculties, and we begin to create a more malleable mindset by visualizing and imagining possibilities and the endless infinity of things that could be occurring in the universe right now, eventually someone will come along, and this would be symbolic of the awakening experience, somebody will eventually pop your balloon and you will realize that you were never the contents of the cranium. You are now this universal awareness that is all around you. And this can be a very startling experience. And so let's move on to the third analogy, which is that of a dam. Let's consider a huge dam, perhaps the Hoover Dam. And imagine yourself on a tiny little boat in the lower waters surrounding this huge, thick concrete wall. But you turn around one day and you see there's a huge crack emerging in the dam. And all of these waters fall down onto your tiny little boat. And you are drowning in these spiritual waters that are being pouring down from higher planes, the Aquarian waters. And there is a whole process of assimilation where you have to acclimatize and try and comprehend and understand what has just happened to you, because here in the West, most people, when this happens to them, will have absolutely no idea. In fact, people get locked up and they get put into psychiatric wards. But eventually, after the months pass, perhaps even years go by, this assimilation levels out and you can find your boat on the level water and begin to understand from a higher perspective the ego structure that has now burst, and the awareness that you've now been endowed with, and the unification of yourself with your higher mind now opens up a dialogue, a higher voice of reason and understanding, wisdom and compassion, which you formerly were unaware of. And so if we move on to the next analogy, this could be that of ice cubes. If we consider the water cycle and we consider the idea of two ice cubes having a conversation with one another. And the ice cube again would be symbolic of the ego structure as we walk around and we think of ourselves as these separate human beings, just getting on with our daily life. But eventually, the sun comes out and begins to melt these ice cubes. And although they thought they were separate entities, as the heat bears down on the cubes, they begin to thaw and turn into liquid. And so this could be seen as being different states of consciousness, one being a contracted, very frozen state of awareness. But now we are melting into the more alchemist type mindset, which is looser, more malleable, more free. And eventually, this transient state of fluid and liquid eventually evaporates into the environment, and we understand that there are 97.5 million billion litres of vapour in our atmosphere at any given time. And this is the new universal unity state of awareness that you've now found and discovered through exercising the imagination and visualization, which gives rise to what we call Buddha nature, Christ consciousness, Krishna spirit, the blood of Christ. We pierce the illusion of matter, we pierce the seventh chakra, the seventh seal, and the Kundalini raises through these chakras and out through the crown chakra. And the Egyptians celebrated this with their hats with two snakes emanating. This is symbolic of the Ida and the Pingala nerves, which correspond to the pineal and the pituitary gland respectively. This is the electromagnetic nature of the reality manifested in our anatomy. The yin and the yang, the electron and the proton, the sun and the moon, etc. And so if we move on to the final analogy, which could be that of a haunted house, as we incarnate here on this planet, we have entered a very dark domain. There's a lot of darkness in the human psyche at this time, and has been throughout the Kali Yuga, which we are now passing out of, into the Vapara Yuga, which will eventually transition into the Treta Yuga and the Satya Yuga, Satchitananda, existence, consciousness, bliss, a golden age for all of us to rejoice and bathe in the spiritual light. This is coming our way, but for the time being, we are in this haunted house with the shadows and shadowy figures and demons of our reality, which are at every turn. And so if you can imagine walking through a haunted house at night time with the creaky floors and the wind blowing the curtains, you might at one point catch a glimpse of yourself in a shattered mirror. And although you've been given a very big fright, you quickly realise that it's just you looking back at yourself. And this is the experience that I felt when I had my spiritual awakening, which began with an awful fright. And I jumped out of my seat and couldn't believe what I'd just experienced and come to be aware of. And so the universe is simply playing hide and seek with itself, and it's doing so to experience itself anew from a brand new perspective. Every time we incarnate, we have the power to forget, which is often, even in our daily lives, a profound blessing, because we don't want to remember certain things that are better left in the past. And so these are just 4 analogies that we can use for the spiritual awakening process. But as I said from the beginning, the secret of the spiritually awake is to die before you die and find there is no death. And so we need to understand that we are the infinite mist that separates us. We are energy itself. If we strip away all of our human constructs and labels, we will begin to realize this truth scientifically. And our science is, of course, beginning to catch up at this time. And so when it does, there will invariably be a raising of human consciousness. Unfortunately, as Albert Einstein said, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. Which means that very soon, as we raise in awareness and gain unity consciousness, this whole notion of non-duality, as the Buddhists have known all along, we will come together and solve poverty, and solve mental illness, and alleviate inequality, and alleviate all the problems that we see that are plaguing our society at this time. And so if you'd like to be a part of this movement, and if you'd like to help raise human consciousness towards the ether, where the illusion of this separation that we're currently experiencing is non-existent, so that we can all begin to build a much better world, a post-capitalist, post-pandemic world that's built on true freedom, autonomy, freedom from external control, that freely provides shelter, energy, food and water as basic human rights, so that we can live more authentically and attain self-actualization for everyone. Co-housing projects for people from all walks of life, where we crowdsource land, we crowdsource the co-housing projects, and we freely provide ourselves a basic right to exist on our own planet. And so if you want to be a part of this, please visit humanityconnected.com, where we are step 1, connecting, step 2, sharing, so that we can help to branch this network out as quickly as possible. And step 3, when we reach a critical mass of 500,000 people, we can begin to support and crowdsource our first plot of land. And from here, it will snowball, and this will be simply the way that we exist in the future. True freedom, true harmony with nature, more abundance and well-being, more authenticity, more equality in society. And so with that said, I thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.